The name's Bond.
James Bond. He's with me.
Let's talk about First Light. When the game was announced, expectations couldn't have been higher. This is the first major James Bond game in over a decade. It was developed by IO Interactive, the studio behind the incredible Hitman games. And Bond fans have been starving for a true 007 experience. Everything was lined up for something special. The question was whether First Light could actually live up to the hype. And the answer to that question is yes, it did. Not only did it live up to expectations, it's one of the best games of the year so far. But what surprised me the most is that it doesn't succeed simply by recreating the Bond we've already seen before. Instead, First Light explores a side of James Bond that no movie, book adaptation, or game has ever fully explored. It takes risks with the character, dives into completely unexpected territory, and somehow ends up feeling more authentic than ever. This game understands Bond on a molecular level. Before we get into this deep dive, I should explain where I'm coming from. I'm a massive Bond fan. I've watched the films countless times, read the Ian Fleming novels, and played my fair share of games. Bond is one of my favorite franchises ever, right alongside Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, and the MCU. So when I say First Light impressed me, that's coming from someone who genuinely cares about this world. The first thing that immediately stood out to me was its version of James Bond. Unlike Daniel Craig's Bond, who had just earned his 00 status in Casino Royale, First Light takes us even further back. This is Bond before he became 007. He's younger, less polished, more reckless, and unlike any version of the character we've seen before. On paper, that sounds risky. A young Bond could have easily felt wrong, but the execution is so strong that it works almost instantly. The opening mission tells you everything you need to know. Bond survives a disaster and is ordered to retreat to safety. Then he notices more survivors. MI6 tells him to stand down, but Bond ignores that order and goes anyway.
Listen carefully. You have less than 1% chance of success. Now stand down.
I'll take those odds.
Bond.
It's reckless, it's dangerous, it's exactly what James Bond would do. Even before earning his license to kill, he already has the instincts that define him. It's also really cool seeing the developers embrace details from the original Ian Fleming novels. One of the coolest examples is Bond's facial scar. Now, if you're someone who has only seen the movies, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But Ian Fleming described Bond as having a thin scar running down his right cheek. It's a small detail, sure, but it shows how much respect IO Interactive has for the source material. That commitment extends into the gameplay. First Light consistently puts you into Bond's shoes through the player's choice. Whether you're eavesdropping on conversations, choosing dialogue options, deciding how to approach an objective, or selecting gadgets for a mission, the game always makes you feel like you're the one making the decisions. That's what separates a good Bond story from a great Bond game. Now, we have to talk about the man himself, Patrick Gibson. Over the past few weeks, fans have been praising his performance non-stop, and honestly, it's deserved. The reaction has been so positive that some people have even suggested he should play the new James Bond in the movies. Personally, I wouldn't go that far, but it shows how much people have connected with this portrayal. What makes Gibson's Bond so compelling is that he's still a rookie. MI6 recruits him because he accomplishes something that is nearly impossible, proving he has potential to become a 00 agent. But unlike the polished Bond we know, this version is impulsive, emotional, and consistently challenging authority. The hotel sequence is a perfect example. Bond notices something suspicious that nobody else catches. His instincts are completely correct, but this action ultimately contributes to Monroe's death. It's a defining moment in the story because it proves his greatest strength is also his greatest weakness. His instincts makes him exceptional, but they also make him dangerous. Yet underneath all of that, you can still see the Bond we know and love. Watching him put on the iconic suit for the first time is fantastic. Seeing him try the first vodka martini, shaken not stirred, and not quite understanding the appeal is a clever touch. Even the explanation behind his eventual 00 designation feels perfectly in character.
It wouldn't be right. Actually, Mom, I thought since I was the 7th recruit.
Happens to be my lucky number.
These moments bridge the gap between the inexperienced recruit and the legendary spy we all know and love. That's ultimately why this version of Bond works so well. He has the confidence, intelligence, and courage that defines every great Bond from Connery to Craig, but he also feels genuinely vulnerable. He carries the trauma of losing his parents while still chasing danger at every opportunity. He's broken in ways we haven't seen before, but he's also driven by an unwavering desire to make the world better. It's a fresh interpretation without ever feeling disconnected from the character's roots. Beyond Bond himself, itself, the supporting cast is just as strong. The standout is John Greenway. Early on, he seems like this stereotypical character who dislikes Bond and thinks he doesn't belong, but as the story unfolds, we will learn more about his connections to 009 and begin to understand what his motivations are. His relationship with Bond evolves in ways I didn't expect, and by the end, he becomes one of the game's most important characters. The title First Light isn't just referring to Bond, it's also a reflection of Greenway's journey in the story's larger themes.
Operation Nightfall changed him. He slipped into darkness. Never could find his way out until you came along. The first light in more than a decade.
It's about finding hope when you've convinced yourself it's gone forever. The rest of the cast is exceptional as well. M, Q, and Moneypenny are some of the strongest versions of the characters we've seen in years. Newcomers like Monroe and Cressida build genuine chemistry with Bond. I was surprised I was caring for them just as much as Bond. Even Acela Vale remains unpredictable throughout the story. Every major character feels like they belong here. Nobody feels like they're simply filling space. The villains, on the other hand, are where things become more complicated. The twin assassins have a great setup and an intimidating presence, but they ended up feeling underused. They dominate certain sections of the story and then disappear far too quickly. Damien and Sir Nicholas Webb are far more successful overall. They have a clear motivation and strong screen presence, but neither fully reach their potential. Webb never feels like as threatening as the story wants him to be, especially during the final act. Damien is more interesting because he's essentially a privileged heir hiding behind technology and influence. He's not physically intimidating, but his ideological conflict with Bond creates some compelling moments. Both characters work, but neither reach the potential of great Bond villains. Thankfully, the gameplay makes up for it. You can feel IO Interactive's Hitman DNA in almost every mission. The stealth systems, social infiltration mechanics, gadget usage, and mission design all feel like natural evolutions of ideas that made Hitman successful. The Q Watch is one of the biggest gadgets in the game, and the freedom you're given during certain missions makes every encounter feel dynamic. Then there are the moments where the game simply lets you unleash chaos. Whenever the story gives Bond a license to kill, it becomes incredibly satisfying to switch from careful spy work to all-out action. Visually, First Light is stunning. Many of the cutscenes genuinely look like scenes from a James Bond movie. The training missions, the criminal underworld sequences, Vietnam, and the Arctic operations all have their own visual identity. Whether it's the lighting, water effects, snowstorms, or environmental details, the game consistently looks incredible. My only gameplay criticism is probably the driving. It's not bad, it's perfectly functional. The problem is that it never becomes exceptional. Compared to stealth, combat, and investigation mechanics, the driving feels relatively basic. A few additional mechanics could have elevated those significantly. That being said, there are standout moments. The chase involving 009 is genuinely exciting and proves that even when the driving isn't incredible, the mission design surrounding it often is. The story is every bit as impressive as the gameplay. On surface, it feels like a classic James Bond adventure, but instead of following a traditional movie structure, it feels like a prestige television series. The game is divided into chapters, each with its own identity, tone, and mission objectives. Every chapter feels like its own Bond adventure while still contributing to the larger narrative. What really elevates the story, though, is the mystery. At first, it seems like the game is telling a fairly familiar Bond story centered around 009. Think of something like GoldenEye. But as more information comes to light, the narrative evolves into something far more ambitious. Themes of corruption, artificial intelligence, manipulation, and political division become central to the plot. The game consistently challenges your assumptions. Every time you've figured out where the story is going, it reveals another layer. It's one of the smartest Bond stories we've gotten in years because it balances classic spy intrigue with surprising relevant modern themes. If I have any major criticisms, there are only really two. Firstly, the opening half can feel slow at times. The setup is important, but certain sections take longer than necessary to reach their payoff. Second, the story occasionally overcomplicates itself with objectives and subplots. There are moments where it feels like you're completing multiple tasks just to accomplish a single goal. Even then, those issues never significantly hurt the experience. The closest comparison I can make is Insomniac's Spider-Man games. Both have flaws, both have areas that could be improved, but both are built on such a strong foundation that their strengths completely overweigh their weaknesses. As a start for a new James Bond gaming franchise, First Light is a massive success. It understands Bond, respects the source material, introduces exciting new ideas, and leaves plenty of room for growth. If this is the future of James Bond games, then IO Interactive have something special on their hands. Now, I know some have worries with the recent news of Amazon saying they will be distributing the games as opposed to IO, but I think people are taking that out of context based to wait and see for more information. And after seeing both the critical and fan reception, I can't imagine this will be the last time we see this version of 007. First Light isn't just a great James Bond game, it's the best Bond game fans have been waiting for. So I'm gonna give First Light an 8.5 out of 10.